We will begin with former President Trump, who on Saturday returned to the site of the first assassination attempt against him. Now, during that rally in Butler, Pennsylvania, he and his allies accused Democrats of trying to kill him.
Over the past 8 years, those who want to stop us from achieving this future have slandered me, impeached me, indicted me, tried to throw me off the ballot, and who knows, maybe even tried to kill me. You know, I always say there's an enemy from within and there's an outside enemy. And if you're smart, the outside enemy is not going to be a problem. Russia, China, North Korea, we're not going to have a problem if you have a smart president. If you have not such a smart president, then it's a problem. But we have an enemy from within, which I think is much more dangerous than the outside enemy.
First, they tried to silence him. When that didn't work, they tried to bankrupt him. When that didn't work, they tried to jail him. And with all the hatred they have spewed at President Trump, it was only a matter of time before somebody tried to kill him.
And then, guys, they tried to kill him. They tried to kill him. And it's because the Democratic Party, they can't do anything right. They can't do anything right. You see it this week in the FEMA response in North Carolina, and in Georgia, and in South Carolina, and in Florida.
This is a pivotal moment for our country. And I don't even have to tell anybody that here. We can all feel it. This is no longer a fight between Republican versus Democrat, left versus right. It is good versus evil. And good is going to win this battle, ladies and gentlemen.
The level of un-American activity that you just saw is stunning. That is un-American. They know they're lying. Donald Trump knows that's a lie. He will tell you that the Secret Service, he thought, did the best job they could do. The fact that J.D. Vance and Trump's family would out and out say what they said takes the threat of violence, takes the threat beyond where it was even leading up to January the 6th. This is an increasingly desperate person, an increasingly desperate family who's preparing for civil war. They just are. Talking about they're trying to kill him. Democrats are trying to kill him. This is it, and the lies. Think about this. I saw part of Donald Trump's speech this weekend. It was remarkable, the lies, not just on things this year, but even on policy. He'd just make up things and just throw it out there. And I'd be shocked if the audience was really that stupid to believe the crazy lies that he was throwing out there. But he does it so much. It is the falsehood, the firehood of falsehoods. But they continue lying about 2020. Vance continues lying about 2020. Trump continues lying about 2020. Senators will not say on Sunday news shows that Donald Trump lost in 2020, despite the fact Republican officials in every one of those states that mattered said that, yes, in fact, Donald Trump lost. Brian Kemp said it in Georgia. Republican officials said it in Michigan. Republican officials said it in Pennsylvania. They said it in Arizona. They have said it repeatedly. Trump and Vance lying about people of Ohio eating dogs and cats. And yet the governor of Ohio, the Republican governor of Ohio, lifelong Republican, telling them to stop, that it is a lie. And now with the people of the Carolinas suffering in a way that only those who have gone through tragic hurricanes like Hurricane Katrina, Hurricane Camille, and now this hurricane could imagine. Donald Trump, J.D. Vance, Eric Trump, everyone else in the Republican Party, entire news channels out and out lying about what's going on the ground there, talking about civil war. It's staggering, just staggering when you have Republican governors from those states, Republican senators from those states, Republican mayors from those states, Republican county commissioners from those states, Republican officials from those states saying that they're doing great. In a tragic situation, they are coordinating very well with the federal government. Donald Trump, shame on Donald Trump. Show this Charlotte Observer headline. It's an editorial from the largest paper in the state of North Carolina. Shame on Donald Trump for worsening North Carolina's tragedy with political lies. And now the lie about Democrats trying to kill him. The lie about a person whose family had a Trump sign in his front yard trying to kill him, or the person who voted for Donald Trump in 2016, the lie that they were somehow part of a federal government conspiracy. They can't run on the truth because they're losing on the truth. And so the lies continue, and the lies get more dangerous, increasingly desperate tactics. It's unbelievable. Increasingly deranged talk, increasingly dangerous provocation, and perhaps a provocation that is preparation for his loss at the ballot box and a call for civil war. And let me tell you, there are hosts. In fact, there is a specific host on another network, the most popular host on that network, that has called for civil war, that has said, let's stop trying to figure this out at the ballot box. Let's move to civil war.
Great.
Does anything sound conservative about this? Because I spent this weekend going back through the books that I grew up on. Not this one. This one came out in 2013. It's Charles Krauthammer, who is an extraordinary conservative, a man that every conservative I respected just loved and respected. Also a man who understood the danger of Donald Trump and warned about the danger of Donald Trump before he died. A man who won the Pulitzer Prize, who may be the great conservative mind of our time, that Donald Trump called I think, quote, dummy. With all this talk this weekend and this desperate move towards a civil war if they lose at a ballot box, I went back and I reread Peggy Noonan, Charles Krauthammer, The Conservative Mind by Russell Kirk, Edmund Burke. And I will tell you, for people that are trying to find the permission structure, who claim to be conservative, vote for this man, you cannot find it. You cannot find it in 240 years of conservative writing. You cannot find that justification for any writing before Donald Trump's rise and the right's capitulation to him. Charles Krauthammer wrote in his introduction to Things That Matter, and explaining why he stopped being a psychiatrist and began writing columns. In the end, everything lives and dies by politics. You can have the most advanced of cultures, get your politics wrong, and everything stands to get swept away. And everything stands to get swept away. And Krauthammer concludes by saying, this is not ancient history. This is Germany 1933. The point applies even if this is not Germany 1933. The point applies if this is something not as savage as Germany 1933, but simply an autocrat who decides to be a dictator on day one, who decides to arrest all those who he doesn't like, to take news networks off the TV as he said he would do if they're not supportive of him, who's talked about assassinating generals that aren't sufficiently loyal to him, has complained to his chief of staff that his generals should be more like Hitler's generals. Of course, Hitler's generals tried to kill Adolf Hitler, but Donald Trump didn't know history, so he didn't know that. Whose own lawyer said in court he could use SEAL Team 6 to assassinate political rivals. And if he were president of the United States, he could not be arrested. Nothing conservative about this. I really do wish anybody that would try to justify a vote for Donald Trump, I really do wish they'd just read the introduction to Russell Kirk, A Conservative Mind, 7th edition. And I'll just read one line here. To general principles in politics, the conservative subscribes. These are principles arrived at by convention and compromise. These are principles arrived at by convention and compromise, tested by long experience and applied with prudence. And for those who would say, how could David French? How could Liz Cheney? How could hundreds of people who voted and worked for Ronald Reagan and George H.W. Bush and George W. Bush, and yes, for Donald Trump, how could they vote for Kamala Harris? This is what Russell Kirk writes at the end of the introduction. But the impulse to improve and the impulse to conserve are necessary to the healthy functioning of our society. Whether we join our energies to the party of progress or the party of permanence must depend upon the circumstances of our time. And add to this the fact that Charles Krauthammer, all the way back to Edmund Burke, has written about how tyrants and dictators and radicals can tear down in one day institutions that took centuries to build up by compromise, convention, and prudence. Less than a month from now, there is a clear choice. And we saw yesterday we all watched football this weekend. We all had a wonderful time this weekend. Sometimes things come at us so quickly that we're numbed by it. Newspapers certainly numbed by it. People in TV that follow this every day numbed by it. We're numbed by it. Everybody's numbed by it. But mark this weekend on your calendar. This is the weekend that Donald Trump spread the virus in the heads of all of his supporters, as did his family, as did his vice presidential candidate. The Democrats plotted to assassinate him. John Heilman, if there's been a more dangerous political strategy in the final month of a presidential campaign, I certainly can't even begin to imagine when it was or what it was. Tell us just how dangerous this new territory is that Donald Trump, Vance, and his family have put us as a nation.